Hello and welcome to Literary Prospects. I'm Kelly Vick, your host, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest. Kristi DeMeester is the author of Such a Pretty Smile, which was selected as a Georgia Author of the Year finalist, and Beneath. Her latest novel, Dark Sisters, is out now. Kristi's short fiction has appeared in publications such as The Dark, Black Static, multiple volumes of the year's best horror, year's best weird fiction, and in her short fiction collection, Everything That's Underneath. Kristi lives, writes, and makes horror-themed candles in Atlanta, Georgia. Kristi DeMeester, thank you so much for being here to talk about your bewitching new novel, Dark Sisters.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'll read a few blurbs. There are
Yes,
so many
please.
of them. I'll just read a few. Book list says, a deadly serious, witchy story propelled by rage against the extraordinary and everyday violence men perpetrate against women. Dark Sisters reaches out across the centuries with a terror that is all too timely. Author Sarah Penner says, Kristi DeMeester returns with Dark Sisters, a hauntingly beautiful exploration of revenge, feminine rage, and the secrets that bind women across time. Told in 3 equally eerie narratives, Dark Sisters reminds us that the past and present are inextricably linked, and in the end, the women won't be silenced. Frightening, subversive, and provocative. And one more, author Rachel Harrison says, a beautifully written, mesmerizing horror epic that sparks with compassion, insight, and righteous anger. This book is a bonfire, a beacon, a balm, a rallying cry. Fierce and unflinching, tender and profound, genuinely frightening, with swift pacing and a taut, deftly threaded narrative. Magnificent. So, with that, Kristi, welcome again. And what
Yes.
can you tell us about Dark Sisters? How do you describe the novel?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, again, thank you so much for having me. And it's so wonderful to always hear, even though when the blurbs come in, you read them and they warm your heart in the moment, to go back and hear them again is always so awe-inspiring and humbling. But so Dark Sisters is a multi-generational story that follows 3 women over the span of 3 centuries, all within one town. Named Hawthorne Springs, which is a fictional town in Georgia. It doesn't actually exist. But it follows them as they are unraveling not only the origin of, but how to overcome a curse that affects only the women within the town. And so within the timelines, we have a 1700s timeline. So we start to understand the origins of this curse that happened. And then a 1950s timeline where we start to see those effects ripple outward all the way into 2007, where we have our third woman who is grappling with it in a kind of more modern setting. And within all of that, there are themes of religious persecution and trauma and purity culture. And so these women dealing with the objectification and subversions that they all have within their time periods, and then also working to overcome those things in addition to this terrible curse. And it's always so hard to sum up an entire book. And I always tell myself, well, you should write something down and have like a little blurb, and then that doesn't feel very genuine either. So,
You did a fantastic job.
okay, thank you.
Not to have it written down and rehearsed, that was especially impressive.
Thank you.
What got this story started for you? What was that little spark that got this one going?
So after I wrapped up my last novel, Such a Pretty Smile, I was kind of sitting on another novel that I had already completed and had not really revisited. I knew that I needed to go back in and edit it. And I said, okay, now's the time. This one book is off my desk. I can refocus on the next book, and got into it and sent it off to my very intelligent, very brilliant agent. And she was thankfully very honest with me and said, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the book you wrote. It's just that the market is currently saturated with these stories. And so I don't think you want to be one voice among many, as opposed to, something else. And she was right. But the characters of the Dark Sisters as an entity already existed within that book. And so they already represented symbolically what happens when we bottle up shame over a long period of time by refusing to look at certain portions of ourselves. And so I went back to the drawing board, and I am not one of those authors who always has so many ideas that they can't keep up. I wish I had that problem. I am so jealous of the authors who are like, I have all these ideas and no time to execute them. And I'm the girl who's like, ooh. So I don't know what's next. And I was kind of sitting with them as an entity, and I really loved them. And I went, I don't want to throw them away completely. And the great thing about writing is no writing is completely wasted writing. It teaches, even the stuff we don't use, it teaches you something, or you reuse it elsewhere. So I did the only thing I could think of to do at the time was I started journaling. And I tried to journal anyway, but I specifically was doing the morning pages that Julia Cameron suggests in her book. Oh gosh, I can never remember the name of her book. It's like The Artist's Way. There we go. But I was doing her morning pages, exercising and journaling a lot, and I started to journal quite a bit about my childhood and my experiences growing up in a fundamentalist religion. And then this is the tie that we were chatting about, which is so funny, in a megachurch. And then, so I was journaling about that. And then I got a little further into some of these memories. And my parents divorced when I was like 10 or 11. And we jumped out of that church and then into a Southern Baptist church. So not, tangentially related, but very different. There was a stark difference in the things that were allowed and the things that I could do now that I wasn't allowed to do previously. But certain things were still very important, and purity culture was still one of those really important things. And so I wrote about my purity ball, and I was really kind of starting to tip it inside out because these were things I hadn't really unpacked and really looked at them from a kind of more adult, logical perspective. I mean, I knew this is kind of a strange thing to experience a party where you dress up in a wedding dress and you pledge your virginity to your daddy. Like, that's a very odd thing to do, I think, if you're from an outside perspective.
Right.
Now, for me, it was very normal and it was very exciting because, I mean, you get a prom dress and a piece of jewelry and a party for you. And I got to wear a tiara and that really excellent punch that they serve at every Southern party, which is like sherbet and like 7-Up and pineapple juice.
Oh, yeah. We have it every Christmas. Still,
Oh,
yeah.
it's so delicious. And so it was in this, really attractive wrapping paper. So I'm journaling about all these things. And then in the midst of all of that happening, Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I woke up the next morning and I was so angry. And then and then it turned to grief, and it like vacillated back and forth all day of here I am, I'm in my 40s now, and I feel like I've personally come so far, we've come so far as humans, and yet how are we back? Right, kind of back where we started, and it seems that things are just continuing to devolve into things that are worse. And so from there, Camilla's story began. I knew then, I was like, okay, this is the story that I want to tell of a young woman who is starting to question the things that she's always known, who is starting to not only see, but understand some of the hypocrisy and the manipulations that have been happening because she's a preacher's daughter. She's being held up as this paragon of virtue, and that's starting to grate against her. And as I was writing her story I started to play with the idea of, okay, what if we have this very insular town, but it is a megachurch, so we're dealing with issues related to materialism and how corruptible money can be, and how we tend to think of these very these Christian ideals as rejecting materialism, and yet somehow it's there and it's really important. And then all these things kind of started to flow. And then I took that idea to my editor and she said, great, or not my editor, my agent. She said, great, this is wonderful. Um, but if you're gonna do a curse, I think it would be good if we got the origin story. I was like,
Oh, okay.
sure, one more. Okay, we'll do another timeline, sure. So then that was where Anne Bolton's point of view came in, the 1700s timeline of going back in time, looking at the origins of how all of this kicks off. And I knew I wanted to do a witchy story, even when I had Camilla's timeline. But I often had found that when you are dealing with stories of the 1700s or the 1600s and witches and accusations of witchcraft, because they weren't burning witches, they were burning women. Of the reality of it all was is that it was all greed based and it was all based in, it's easy to accuse a single woman who has money or who has land of something that is going to put a black mark on her forever and then take her money and land. So
Mhm.
I wanted to subvert that though, because a lot of the time you read those stories and you see, oh, okay, well, they're accusing women and then there's nothing to it. I said, well, but what if she really was? What if
Mhm.
she really was practicing witchcraft, but not in the way that people expect? In the
Mhm.
in the reality of it, of the idea of looking at nature-based practice and the dualities of how nature, the energy interacts with our own. And so using that as a jumping off point to explore how the curse that affects only these women starts. So then I'm really excited and I'm like, okay, I have the origin. And as I take it back to my agent, she goes, I think we need one more time. I went, oh God. I was okay, sure. And then I would, but then as I was as hesitant as I was to do it because more work,
Mhm.
um, I realized that she was right. I needed that third completion. If I'm looking at witchcraft and the impact over time, I was like, okay, well, I'm really looking at the maiden, the mother, and the crone. I'm looking at a young woman on the
Mhm.
precipice of adulthood. I'm looking at an adult mother, and Mary Shepherd, in the 1950s, who is at not the precipice of her life, but she's made her choices and she's kind of in that middle and she's looking back and saying, I wish I could have done it differently.
Mhm.
And then you have the crone with Anne Bolton in the 1700s, who is as awful as it sounds, in her mid 30s at the end of her life in the 1700s, looking back in regret and understanding that she did the best she could and she made the choices that she thought she was supposed to be making, or she did them out of she thought was good or what was genuine love, but
Mhm.
realizing that that doesn't always mean that it's right.
Mhm.
And now I can't undo it. And so then all of a sudden it started to make more sense as to who these Dark Sisters as an entity that were in the original book were now going to become in this book, and how they were going to kind of float through those three timelines and what occupation they were going to serve in each of those timelines versus what they actually are. So it was it was the most interesting experience writing a book I think I've ever had of really tangling with all of those timelines to try to get them to not only build on one another, but come together was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it sounds so you actually the timelines were written completely separately, it
So
sounds like.
no.
Okay.
So what was really funny, when I sent off the initial pages to my agent, they were sample pages. So it was like 20 to 30 pages of Camilla's story. And then it was 20 to 30 pages of Anne's story. And then 20 to 30 until I had kind of like a chunk of this is kind of what the order is going to look like that I could then send to my editor to say, okay, well, here's what I'm thinking for this next book. But then after I'd sold it and after St. Martin's acquired it, at that point, I did it back and forth. And I don't, who's to say if that was the best way to do it? I've heard a lot of different people say, oh, I've got to do the whole timeline all at once
Hmm.
and then switch and do the next one. But it was almost as if I didn't do them back and forth, the pieces would not have fit together the way that I wanted them to because I knew that each chapter was threading one thing into the next. And
Hmm.
so I think I filled like four notebooks, like four handwritten notebooks, where before the chapter I would sit and I would just get like kind of generically sketch out the plot for the chapter with notes of how the previous one and how the next one were going to fit.
Oh,
I think my brain would have broken if I tried to do it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
Yes. Oh my, I really did though. At one point in my office, I had sticky notes all over my wall that looked like that scene in Always Sunny in Philadelphia where Charlie's got the red string going everywhere because it was just, there were these little details where I went, I have to pick this back up later. Like, don't forget.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
You have said that Camilla, the young woman,
mhm.
um, she is who you imagine you might have grown up to be had you remained in the church.
Absolutely. I absolutely feel that had things continued going down the path that they were, that I was going to be a commit. Maybe even more frightening is that I would have probably ultimately become Camilla's mom. I would have
Mhm.
ultimately become an Ada. Had I not woken up to in some capacity, because you were taught to want all those things of and to not really question much else. And if you did question it, you were a bad person. And there was a lot of guilt and shame wrapped up in wanting to extend beyond the norm of what we were told we should want. If you want a husband, you want a family, you want to serve your husband and your family. You don't want to go to college. Why would you want any more education beyond what we can give you?
Mhm.
Um, and you want to serve your church, and that's it. And so I think had I not had, now I have a very complicated relationship with my own mother, but she really pushed me for education.
Mm.
And that may have been a double-edged sword. I think that she wanted the education for me, but then also that was the thing that ultimately kind of bumped me out of the sphere. I think that was
Mhm.
she was more comfortable with. But yeah, Camilla, there's a lot of me in Camilla and a lot of Camilla in me. So
Mhm.
that's a lot of her story is mine.
Is she the character that you feel is the most you, or do you have a sort of a favorite?
It's funny because even though Camilla, I feel most closely aligned with Camilla just in terms of life experience and the thing and the understandings of the world and things like that, or what we went through. And I know I'm talking as if these are real people, and I understand they're fictional, but Mary
Well,
was my
they're
favorite.
real in a
They're
sense. I
real.
mean,
Well,
they're
and
real. Yes.
yeah, I lived with them long enough to have them feel
Yeah.
very real. No, Mary ended up being my favorite. And I didn't, it's not that I didn't expect, because we love all of our characters for
Mhm.
various reasons, but I felt most deeply connected to her because I think she represents more so the woman that I grew into,
Mhm.
of all of a sudden come having this very sudden, very quick awareness of I I wish I'd made different decisions. Now, granted, her story is not my story, but I think that once you kind of have settled into the life path that you've chosen, there are these moments where you look back and go, did I make the right call? Did I do the right
Mhm.
things? Am I living as authentically to myself as I could be? Or was I told a different story for so long that I just grew into living that life? And now I realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Um, and I think that particularly for women is something that happens a lot because we are told from such a young age of, very kind of prescriptive of here are the things you're expected to do or pick from these 10.
Mhm.
And I got it, like I got into college. I knew I would go to college and, the pressure there is we got to pick a major.
Mhm.
I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was 18 years old. I had barely disconnected from my own family. I'm like, I don't know. So I just was like, well, I like to read. I guess I'll teach high school English. And man, if I could go back, be like, don't do it. Don't do it. Um, but and then you spend the next 15 years kind of, well, now what? I'm in this path. I can't, if I unravel it, I'm gonna blow up everything else. And so I felt really deeply connected to Mary just on a kind of spiritual level. And so I really loved her. And then she broke me. I mean, right in half because I knew what was coming, bless. But I couldn't see another way out. But yeah, she was the one for me.
You, in your author's note, said, and I just thought this was written so beautifully. Dark Sisters is about anger. It's about acceptance of all parts of the self and absolution. It's about compassion in a time where it is mocked and deemed weakness. Can
Mm.
you talk about that? Just thought it was so wonderfully said.
Yeah, I am very much of the mindset, and this is something that I have been, again, trying to work toward and work on for several years now, and it's not easy by a long shot, but that sense of, I think, shame and guilt are things, and particularly in growing up, if you've grown up in a very strict religion,
Mm,
those are some things you carry from a very young age because those are manipulation tactics of if I can make you feel shame, if I can make you feel fear, if I can make you feel guilty for
mm,
something, then I can very easily turn your head toward the things that I want you to say or do. And I spent a long time either burying those parts of myself, even though there was nothing within them to be ashamed of,
mhm,
that I numbed probably 80% of my personality or 80% of the person that I actually was. And then all of a sudden you're an adult and you're having these weird reactions to things, or you don't understand why you're avoidant of certain things, or and you have to start to really get into some things you don't want to look at because it's you're having to go back in and question, well, a long time ago, there was this very natural part of me that I showed someone and they told me it was wrong.
mhm,
And then I took that and I kept it. And I walked around for the rest of my life believing that not just that that part or that they thought that that part was wrong, I am wrong. I am not good.
mhm,
And you hear that or you think that long enough, you really start to believe it. And so I spent a long time trying to say, take all these little parts of myself that was like, okay, well, someone told you that wasn't good. That made you feel like you're not a good person. And now you have to open your arms to that, even though you've been resistant to it your entire life. And to say, it's okay, even if you're uncomfortable with it, to be like, that part of me is fine. It's okay to be that way, to feel like that, to look at the world in that way. Or if it truly is wrong, and I think this is the harder part, this is where that compassion comes in,
mm,
that is so hard for people to do. And that's why there was a specific scene between Camilla and her best friend Brianna where I was like, I need this scene to demonstrate this.
mm,
Because I think where people get confused sometimes, and I feel like I'm therapizing right now, and I swear I'm not, but it's it's one of those moments where accepting all parts of the self does not mean blind acceptance. It has to mean that you are willing to be uncomfortable enough to see a part of yourself that is wrong, that
mm,
is ignorant, and then apologize and fix it. People don't want to do that. So
mm,
there's the part of ourselves we keep in the dark because we're ashamed of it, and then for reasons that are stupid. And then there are the parts of ourselves we keep in the dark because we're ashamed of them because maybe we should be.
mm,
But when people bring it up to us, we get defensive. We want to argue. We want to say, "But I'm all these other things too." And it's like there's still avoidance happening. And so there's that scene with I'll go back talking about that, but like the Camilla and Brianna where Brianna turns it back on Camilla and she says, like you get to be ignorant
mm,
of you get to pretend like because they're arguing about whether she's like, the Dark Sisters aren't real, it's just a story, they make it up. And she was like, yeah, I understand that, but what you don't understand is you get to just brush all that under the rug. You get to internalize it and say, yeah, it's just a story. But the bottom line is it does impact all of us. They are using it as a manipulation tactic, and you get the better end of it
mhm,
than the rest of us, particularly me. And she I think she says at one point, like you're like pretty white girl mentality of you get to just bob around and things don't impact you in the same way that they impact me. And Camilla has a moment where she starts to defend herself.
Mhm.
And because in her brain, she's like, no, we're the same. We're both women. We're both under this regime. We're both treated in these ways. I have it just as hard as you do. And Brianna has to take her head and force it and go, it's not the same. And you have to see it and you have to accept it. And it's really uncomfortable
Mhm.
because you have to now reckon with the parts of yourself you don't like. And so that's where that compassion, I think, for the self and for others really is important because that was like with female friendships and that being such a central theme of the story and like how generational trauma unfolds and it infects one generation to the next. If I'm like, if we aren't willing to not only have compassion for other people, but also compassion for ourselves in accepting the discomfort, we're not going to get there because I hate it when people are like, if you can't accept me at my worst, you can't have me at my best. And I'm like, that is such, can I say that? Can I cuss? I'm sorry. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I was like, I'm just about like, that is such bullshit. That is the biggest cop out on the planet. All that means is you are not willing to do the work of being uncomfortable. I preached a sermon. I'm sorry.
I love it. And I loved it. The Dark Sisters. I love this sort of lore of the Dark Sisters, this entity. And I was wondering, did that all sort of come from you, or were you basing on any sort of lore? I mean, we're Southern, there's a lot of lore.
Oh yeah. All kinds of weird things
Yeah.
and yeah. I so the Dark Sisters themselves kind of they came from my own brain, but they are an amalgamation of kind of a lot of the things that I just heard about when I was a kid. And I wanted them to be the story that's being used by the path, the religion in Hawthorne Springs. They're a manipulation tactic. They're the thing that is this. It's the scary thing that you tell kids so they don't do the thing that they're not supposed to do. Right? Like if you get
Mhm.
out of bed in the middle of the night, the boogeyman's gonna get you because I'm trying to keep you in bed. Oh my God, go to sleep. Um, and so there's lore around here. Like I live very close to a number of Civil War sites, and so there's a place like just down the street that they call the Hellhole.
Mm.
And there, growing up around here, and if you're in high school, you drive out there in the middle of the night, and it's like, you go sit out at the Hellhole for like an hour to see if you can see anything or hear anything, and so there's all those kinds of stories. But more than anything, I was remembering the fear stuff that I was fed when I was young. So in my church, again, it was fundamentalist, and so it was very much like anything of the world, of the outside world, was not allowed. So women were not allowed to cut their hair or wear makeup or wear pants. Everything was about modesty. Your skirts had to be over past your knees, and nothing low cut. And you couldn't watch any television or movies or secular radio. So while horror as a genre was very frowned upon because it was from the devil,
Mm.
horror was used all the time in sermons, in Sunday school lessons, in all components of, because I mean, you're talking about a religion where the devil and demons are real.
Mm.
It's not these metaphorical things. These are real entities. And so it was used constantly. Fear as a control tactic. And so, like, again, our church had a lot of money, and so every year at Easter they would put on the Passion Play, right? So they would do the full thing of the crucifixion of Christ and the resurrection, and they would have blood on stage of when Jesus has his side pierced, he'd have a blood bag and there'd be blood everywhere. When the whipping would happen, there would be blood packs and like there would be spray. So
Mhm.
it was a terrifying thing to witness. And one of my favorite, they did it a couple years in a row, and it was a completely separate thing. They always did it, but right before back to school. So it was always in like late July. And it was a skit, and it was specifically for students. And I remember being 5 or 6 years old, sitting in the like one of the pews, and in the skit, it was a group of high school kids, all friends. They were going to go to a party that their parents didn't know about. and they shouldn't be going to this party. And then they get to the party and there's beer. Oh no. So these four kids, okay, they all split one beer. Wow. They all
That
split
is a nightmare of a party.
yeah, oh, right. I was like, can we not get some wine coolers or something? Um, so they split one beer, and then one of the kids, like two of the, there is a couple. And so they end up kissing at the party. And then they drive back home. And of course, they get in a car accident and they all die. And because they went to this party and they drank, and then the couple kissed each other, they all go to hell. Right. So I am not joking when I tell you it was the most intense experience. I mean, because they had the production value there. So they get in the car crash and there's like all the lights go out and there is strobe, strobe, strobe. And then the strobe drops and it goes to all red. And they would have actors, and you ever seen those blackout suits where it's like just a
Yeah.
full, okay. They'd
Yeah.
be in blackout suits with the mouths cut out. And they would come crawling down the aisles as in their demons. And they all had blood packs in their mouth that they would have bitten. And so there's blood like running out of their mouths and all over their teeth. And we're all children. Like we're all in school.
Yeah.
They're crawling past us, like trying to grab us, like hissing at us. It's a haunted house.
Yeah.
And the whole point was like, hey guys, no drinking, no kissing. You'll go to hell. And I'm I'm in kindergarten, sitting there as these grown ass men are running like coming by me, blood everywhere, and again on stage the kids are I mean it's bloody. They're all like and um I just as I was going through that, if I was like the idea of lore, of a
Mhm.
story, a legend being used as religious fear baiting, absolutely. If I was like, what do you mean that there wouldn't be a story about like watch out or the dark sisters will get you?
Mhm.
They did it to me. So why not? So it was kind of just like a blending of a lot of those things from growing up.
Wow. What do you, that's going to stick with me for a long time, Kristi.
Right.
And this was going on down the street from
I
my
know. I
house.
know.
We discussed beforehand that your megachurch that you based it on was very close to where I grew up too. We're
Yep.
both from Georgia.
Yep.
Um, how did you come to writing horror?
I fought it for a really long time. I came to writing late, just because I was always a reader. I loved reading.
Mhm.
But it had never occurred to me to give myself the permission to do my own stories. I don't know. I felt like I was like, oh, you're not good enough. That's other people's jobs, that's stuff for really glamorous people. I mean, like writing is not glamorous. But I kind of stumbled into it by happenstance, and then it felt like a homecoming. Like, oh, you should have always been here. You should have always been doing this. My In Georgia, at least at the time, if you wanted a bit of a pay increase as a teacher, if you went and got your master's degree, you would get a little bit of a pay bump. And so I knew I would inevitably do that, but I really didn't want to get an education because I knew that if I did, I would just be pigeonholed there forever. I didn't want to go into leadership. I had no desire to be admin. Like I was like, no. And so at the time, if your master's degree was in an adjacent field to what you taught, they would still give you the pay bump. And so my alma mater had a program in creative writing. And so I went, well, great. I mean, that's English adjacent. So I'll just do that. Writing seems fun. And I got in and I went, oh my God, why did this take me so long? And so as I was in my program, it's a great program. And the people who are running it now are wonderful and really done some great things with it and kind of updating it. But at the time, genre writing was kind of not frowned upon, but you were expected to be literary.
Mm.
If you're going to be a writer, you need to be doing Faulkner ripoffs or, like Hemingway-esque. And so I really tried for a long time to go more literary. And then part of my like dissertation at the end in order to graduate was we had to write a novel, and we had advisors that we met with regularly. And as I'm writing this book at the time, I am meeting with my advisors, and they both kind of sat me down and said, I think you're writing a horror novel. And why don't you just do that? And I went, it felt, I felt, never felt like I needed permission, but it was like I did. And
Mhm.
so horror had always been the genre that I loved the most. It was what I read, it was what I watched. And so I went, okay. And so I felt like I came to it really late. I mean, I didn't start writing horror seriously, I think, until I was like 31, 32. And so because it was the genre I always loved so much, if I went, well, now I can write the things that I want to read.
Mhm.
Because I would be reading horror and I was like, oh, these are fine and they're great, but I want to read stories about this. And so it gave me the chance to kind of play in the sandbox where I had always wanted to be. So it just took a long time.
What do you think draws you to, has always sort of drawn you to horror in particular?
Well, when I was younger, it was because it was rebellion. It was because it was the thing I was told not to look at. But now there is, I think, something very comforting in it.
Mm.
As weird as that sounds, and I think I've heard so many other horror people or horror writers or um, who are in the horror field say this, of that there's a comfort in this idea that even in the most horrific situation, humanity has the capacity to continue. And even sometimes, we don't always get happy endings, but that there's still something there that gives you this idea of, if this is the worst that can happen, I as a person can still continue past that. And that there's a deep sense of comfort in that, because the world, man, is bleak. Um, so it's very hard sometimes, to look at it and go, how do I keep, how do I go to the grocery store today? How do I make dinner and act like everything's not falling apart? But
Mhm.
I think horror is the genre that lets you see, like, you can, and we should, because otherwise it does just keep getting worse.
You've said that you're not a fan of the term literary horror.
I have.
Why not?
Not because of what it stands for. Because I do think that, we need qualifications like that. We just do. We need genre labels. As hesitant as I am to label things, because I want to be like, can it just all be what it is? I get it. Of, like, we have to put it somewhere in the bookstore. We have to market it somehow. Like, I understand. But I feel like what literary horror can do, not on purpose, but it can do, is it gives this sense of pretentiousness
Mm.
to a genre that plays a lot in the unpretentious. And I think it's because it wants to focus so much on the language, on the elevation of the language, as make is that's the thing that makes it intellectual. That's the thing that makes it better than this
Mm.
other schlock that gets, pumped out as horror. And I love, don't get me wrong, I love an elevated language book. I love the things that are deemed literary horror, because I love that sense of like disparate disparity that happens when you have a really horrific thing being described in a really beautiful way. Like, I love that feeling that it gives me.
Mm.
And so I'm not opposed to literary horror as a term for that. I just wish people would get away from being like, well, it's better than,
Yeah.
because it's more intellectual. And I'm like, I mean, it can all be good. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, still, let's not be so snobby.
Yes. Yeah. I totally get that. I'm right there with you on it. Um, what was the road to publication like for you?
Long, no, really long. No, I I knew I ultimately wanted to do novels, but when I first started out writing, I did short stories alone for a very long time, because I didn't really feel brave enough to go and really do the novel. Now, I had the novel that I started because I had to do it for
Mhm.
my master's program, but I put that away and went away from it because I was like, that's garbage. I was not a good writer yet. Um, so did short stories for a really long time and then really fell in love with short stories to this day. I mean, I know novels pay the bill now, but I love writing short stories. God, it is just such a wonderful experience because the readers will follow you like into the most bizarre situations because you don't have to answer as many questions. It's a short story, like I get to do the crazy stuff without having, an editor, there we go, going, this doesn't make sense. They aren't going to understand. And I'm like, it doesn't matter because, but, but I knew I would ultimately come back to working on a novel. And so after my son was born, I was like, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to get back into it. And so I started working on what ultimately became my very first novel, which was a novel called Beneath that was published by an indie publisher. And I queried that one for a really long time. I think close to like a year and a half. And had a number of agent like nibbles and then ultimately a lot of passing. And so I really loved that book, but I think there was a part of me that recognized like I think I need more practice with novel writing because plotting a novel is so different. And
Mhm.
I just wasn't there yet. And so I did ultimately end up working with a wonderful indie publisher who, the editor was great and really helped guide me through and teach me a lot about the structure of a novel so that by the time I started working on my next one, I really felt like I had a better foundation under me. And so that next one ultimately ended up being Such a Pretty Smile, which was my first traditionally published book, which went with St. Martin's. And I worked on that book, I want to say, for about 2.5 years, and then queried it for about another year after that. And had, again, a lot of nibbles. Um, and then I got for my very first revise and resend, which had not happened yet.
Mm.
Somebody, they do the thing where they say, hey, can we get on a call? And then your stomach drops into your butt and you start to freak out like, this is it. So she talked me through and again, taught me a lot about the way a novel should be structured. I took like another 5 months, revised it, and then she ultimately passed. And I thought,
Mm.
I think I cried for 3 days straight. It was hard. You think this is it and it's not, and but ultimately it ended up being better
Mm.
because it reminded me. Once I got done crying, I picked myself back up and said, "Okay, the book is better now. It really is." Sent it back out, and then I think within 2 months, after sending it back out with that revised version, I had offers on the table, which was unbelievable. But then it was like another year and a half of revisions. So going back and forth with my agent, really getting that book into shape, really making sure that it was hitting all the things it needed to hit. And again, I learned a lot about structure and plot and how things need to move. But then once the novel went out on sub, I'll never forget this. And I love being able to tell this story because I feel like I don't get to tell this story very frequently. And oh my God, we're almost at the anniversary of this happening too, which is so funny. I just realized that. So this is great. Of so I was teaching high school at that time. And I knew we were going out on sub, but agents notoriously like to be very cagey
Mm.
because writers are neurotic and will like try to hunt through everything to try to look for hints in what like stock editors Twitter's the time and everything else. And so I knew she was like, okay, it's going out on sub on a Tuesday. And this is all lining up exactly the same, because almost exactly the same, because Valentine's Day was on a Friday that year. So it was Valentine's Day. My husband and I had plans that night to go see the Gay Atlanta Men's Chorus perform Queen for Valentine's Day. And so I is the end of the day. I had just finished up and I pulled out my phone and I had a missed call, a voicemail, and a text message from my agent being like, "Hey, call me." And again, I went, oh, because I mean, we had just gone out on sub. It was Tuesday to Friday.
Wow.
So I call her back and she says, and it wasn't just, like, oh, hey, we have an offer. She's like, I need you to sit down because I went, okay. I'm like, okay, so this is either going to be really good or it's going to be really bad. So at that point, she told me, we have a preempt offer. Um, and then I hate talking about this too, but I also think this is the part that authors don't really talk about, right? Like nobody ever talks numbers. It was life changing. I, I thought I thought I had like exited my body for a moment and come back out. And I had to ask her to repeat it like 6 times. And I'm like, no, like each digit. Can you just say each digit for me? So,
I'm sorry. Could you just
right. Like I think I hallucinated. Like,
Yeah.
say, can you write it? Can you put it in can you text it to me so that I can see
Yeah.
it? Um, and so at that point, I was flabbergasted, especially given how long it had been of to get to that point. I mean, it had been like a 5 to 7 years of querying and revising and then getting the agent and then revising again. And so it was just, and then after that, literally the next month, COVID hit.
Oh God.
And so I had between actually selling the book and signing my contract was another year and a half
Oh my God.
before I could even announce the book. And then it was like another 9 months after that before the book came out. So it was a very long road, a very, very long road. But it was the most exhilarating, like exciting, crazy experience ever. I am so lucky to be surrounded by just incredibly savvy, intelligent women.
Mhm.
Of like my editor is brilliant, my agent is brilliant, their whole teams are brilliant. And so it just has been like if I could go back in time and look at me and be like you're gonna experience magic one day, like for real. And just hang in there, girl. You're gonna get there. Just wait, it'll be okay. So and then but yeah, after that things have thankfully gone a little faster.
Well, how did then Dark Sisters, following Such a Pretty Smile, how did it go with Dark Sisters then?
Dark Sisters was also not as long, but a lengthier process just because there was a lot of back and forth in changing the story because of like with those 3 timelines of like, okay, I think we're going to add this. Let's add this again. And then I did not a, well, I guess it was a fairly significant overhaul. And then my editor also had a baby in the middle of all of that. So she was on maternity leave for a little bit. So things got extended even more. So it was probably 3.5, 4 years, another, before from really like concept to completed version. But again, I don't think it would have been the book that it was had all those things not happened. And so as frustrating as it could feel like, oh my God, this is taking forever. Um, I think I needed that time to really understand how those stories were going to flow together. But and the good news is after, each book it's getting a little faster. So
Well, and when you're working on the second is sold not as a complete
right.
manuscript, but on idea, right?
Yes, yeah. So
Basically, is
I
that how-
sold I sold Dark Sisters on completed outline and
Mhm.
like the first 50 pages. And so, you have to then actually write the book after that
Yeah.
and then go through the editing process. And so, that's what the book that I'm currently working on, it was the same thing. So, on the first 50 pages and an outline, and now it's due in May. So, working on it.
Exciting.
Yeah.
But great too to have that process of working with an editor at the publisher
Yes.
as your
Yes.
through
Yes,
the
because you
drafting.
have that direct access to the exact person who's going to be the say of how this thing goes. And so it's so nice to be able to, when I have a crazy idea, to be able to shoot off a quick email and be like, hey, so I was thinking about this thing. Am I nuts? And
How
get that
crazy can
feedback.
we get here?
Right, exactly.
What is your best or favorite advice for aspiring authors?
I have so many things, but I think the number one thing is don't be afraid to keep going, even when it hurts. And I think that's a fancier way of saying like don't quit.
Mhm.
Um, but because it's gonna hurt a lot of the time. This is the kind of, and I this is probably what people who are in like acting and singing, any kind of entertainment go through. There's a lot of rejection, and sometimes it's soft, and sometimes it's not. And then beyond rejection, there's a lot of feedback that starts to come once your book goes out into the world and it doesn't belong to you anymore. And so like giving yourself the bandwidth and the confidence to be like, this is going to hurt and I'm going to do it anyway. Um, sometimes, yeah, like writing from a place of spite is the best, the best place to write from, like, hey, I know you said this, I'm going to do it anyway. Um, because yeah, there's a lot of get knocked down, stand back up, get it again, 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 and just keep. If you run your head into the wall enough times, it will break eventually.
I've never heard it put quite like that, and I think that's great.
Not a very soft way of putting it, but I
It's
mean,
a
yeah.
fantastic way. It's a great way to put it.
Mhm.
We have a traditional last question on this podcast, and it is when Dark Sisters is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
The theme song.
Mm.
Okay. All right. I may have to do a quick moment because I have a song in mind, but I can't remember the name of it. Because I have it in my Spotify, because I always make a playlist for every book that I write,
Mhm.
that I will play as I am writing because it puts me into the right headspace and the right mindset that I think I need to be in when I'm working on that book. Yeah, okay, I have it. I was like, I can't believe I can't remember the name of the song because it was so central. It's the very first song in the playlist. So it is Eartha Kitt's My Heart Belongs to Daddy. And it just so beautifully sums up all of the themes of the book in a really tongue-in-cheek kind of way
Mhm.
that it's perfect. It's beautiful.
I can't wait to hear it as a theme song when we get to see the movie or series.
Oh my God. Well, I would love that. Oh gosh, I would love it. Like I have mental like things of like who I want to see in certain roles. So,
Well, hold on. Then let's hear quickly
oh,
who we want to
okay.
see in certain roles.
Okay. So I used to be much better about like actually having a little Pinterest board where I had like actors picked out, but I only did a few this time around because I don't know, I couldn't like find an actor I felt that fit 100%, but there's only two, okay? And so for Sharon, who is Mary's love interest in the 1950s timeline, to me Sharon is Samara Weaving, who, if you've seen Ready or Not, with where she just got married and they're gonna play hide and seek, and it's a wonderful horror movie. But Sharon, for me, I just was like visually, it's Samara Weaving. And then for Henry Burson, who is Camilla's father, the kind of very charismatic preacher of this megachurch, and maybe this is just my own like crush talking. To me, that is 100% Sam Reed. Of I'm like, put him in the pulpit, give him like, the classic like all American haircut.
Hmm.
Done.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
perfect.
Hmm. Love it. Do you have more?
I don't. I wish I did. It was one of those things where when I started to think about it, I was much better about this with Such a Pretty Smile. Like I had people picked out for everybody, but it was one of those things with where I was going into this where I would start to look at actors and I was like, no, that's not quite right. Oh no, that's not quite right either. And so I just stopped. I was like, this isn't fun anymore. So
All right. Well, we've got a partial cast.
yes,
Partial cast.
yeah, sure. And I'm sure now that if I actually went back and I started looking again, I would probably find people. I think I was probably too close I was too deep in the story in the moment to kind of like objectively look at it. But I bet I could find some folks now.
Kristi DeMeester, thank you so, so much for joining today. It has been a joy talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I had a great time. Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.